I've gotten a couple questions about two of the homework problems, so I figured I would make a video and try and answer. So the first one is section 3.2, number 11. It says to graph the piecewise function to find the domain and range. Give the answers in the interval notation. So let's go ahead and graph this. Coming up with a graph for a piecewise function can be a little tricky. What you want to do is take each rule for the piecewise function. So the first one is x minus 2. So I'm going to write that as an equation. And then the second one is y is equal to 3x plus 5. So we're just going to graph each of these lines. Don't worry about the restrictions, the x less than or equal to 0 or x greater than 0. So for y is equal to x minus 2, that line has a slope of 1, a y-intercept of negative 2. So start at negative 2, we're going to go down 1, right 1. So our line is going to look something like this. For y is equal to 3x plus 5, we have a y-intercept of 5. The slope is 3, so I'm going to go up 3, right 1. I can also go down 3, left 1. So the graph is going to look something like that, roughly. Now let's think about what the restriction says. So for y is equal to x minus 2, which is the blue line, that is only in effect when x is less than or equal to 0. So less than or equal to 0 is going to be the left portion of the graph. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the right portion of the graph. And at 0, because it says x is less than or equal to 0, we're going to have a closed circle when x is equal to 0. In other words, that line has an x value that's equal to 0. So what we can do is put a solid circle there. And then for the red line, the restriction is saying x is greater than 0. So greater than 0 is to the right portion of the graph. Everything to the right of the y-axis. Because it's just greater than, we have an open circle there. So let's eliminate everything to the left. And because it says x is greater than 0, we're going to have an open circle. Whoops. We're going to have an open circle at that point right there. And this makes sense that we have one of these lines with an open circle, one with a closed circle, because if they were both closed circles, this would not pass the vertical line test because there would be two y values when x is equal to 0. Okay. Now let's figure out what the domain and the range are. So the domain, remember, is all the input values for the function. When we're looking at a graph, we can consider all the x values. Well, when we go to the left, the blue curve goes to negative infinity along the x-axis. When I get to 0, we're still on the blue curve, but then as I go further to the right, the red line, I was saying curve, but the red line picks up, and that continues going to the right. So for the domain, we would say all real numbers here. Okay, now for the range, let's think about this. The smallest y value is negative 2, and then it continues up. Now this blue line just continues to go up. So we don't even need to consider the red line because the blue line starts at negative 2, but it goes all the way to positive infinity. So we're going to start at negative 2, and we go all the way up to positive infinity. Now, so the range for this particular equation, or this particular piecewise function, is going to be negative 2 to infinity. Now we know on infinity we always have a parenthesis. At negative 2, because we have a filled-in circle right here, that means we are including negative 2. Now, let's suppose, so this is the final answer for this question, but let's suppose this blue line was not increasing and up and to the left, but was going down and to the left like this. So if our graph looked like this range is going to be a little bit different. The range now, well, the smallest y value you get is negative infinity, and we're going up to 2. And then again, we start at 5, and then we go to positive infinity. So in this case, the range would be negative infinity up to 2, and we're going to include 2, and then union 5 to infinity, and we're going to not include the 5 here. So in this case, where the arrows are going away from each other, we would have 2 parts with a union symbol for the range. All right, and then this one I also got a couple questions about. So find the domain and range. So the domain, again, is the what values on the x-axis does this graph hit. So the furthest to the left we go is -1, but because there's an open circle, we're not going to include -1. And then to the right, we go to 3, but because the graph has a filled-in circle at 3, we're going to include 3. Now for the range, the smallest y value we get is -3, and because the graph passes through -3, we're going to include -3. And then how high up does the graph go? Well, it goes to -2, and if we look, we have a closed circle and an open circle. So does the graph hit -2? Well, it doesn't on the left side, but it does on the right side, so we're going to include -2. So that would be the range.